Bullies mock blind girl at school. Her Navy SEAL father teaches them a lesson. The morning air at Roosevelt High carried the chill of early spring. The sun was out, but its light did little to warm the courtyard where students gathered before the first bell. Some laughed in groups, their voices rising with the carefree joy of youth. Others walked hurriedly toward classrooms, clutching books and bags. And then there was Emily Carter. Emily moved differently from the rest. She wore a blue hoodie pulled tightly around her face, her backpack snug on her shoulders. In her right hand she gripped a white cane, tapping gently against the concrete path. Her steps were careful, each one deliberate, guided by the rhythm of the cane striking the ground. Dark sunglasses shielded her eyes, but everyone at school knew she was blind. For most, Emily's presence was a quiet reminder of resilience. She never complained. She did not ask for pity. She came to school each day head high, even though the stares and whispers never really went away. But for a certain group of boys, her blindness was not something to respect. It was something to mock. They were easy to spot. Varsity jackets, bright red with white sleeves, the big embroidered R stitched proudly on the chest. The leaders of Roosevelt High's football team walked with a swagger that seemed rehearsed, their loud voices carrying over the chatter of the courtyard. At the center of the group was Tyler Grant, a broad-shouldered junior with sharp features and a grin that rarely meant kindness. Tyler thrived on attention, and today his eyes landed on Emily. "Hey, look, it's the Batgirl," Tyler sneered, loud enough for his friends to laugh. "Careful, Emily, don't trip over a shadow." The boys erupted in laughter. Some students nearby glanced nervously at Emily, but none spoke up. Emily's cane tapped on steady, unshaken. She had grown used to the comments, though each one left a small cut inside, a wound that only she could feel. Tyler wasn't finished. He nudged his friend, Chris, and whispered something. The boys nodded in agreement, their laughter rising again. As Emily reached the steps leading into the building, Tyler suddenly stepped forward. With a quick tug, he yanked at her hood, pulling it down from her head. Emily gasped and stumbled slightly, her hand tightening on her cane. She turned her head toward the voice, her lips pressing into a thin line. Tyler leaned close, smirking, his words dripping with cruelty. "You aren't leaving alive," he muttered, pretending to make it sound like a movie villain's line. His friends roared with laughter, clapping him on the back as if he had delivered the punchline of the century. The courtyard buzzed with tension. Emily stood still for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She wanted to keep walking, to pretend it didn't matter, but her heart pounded in her chest. The sting of humiliation was sharp, and the laughter felt endless. She pulled her hood back over her head and tapped her cane against the ground, forcing herself to move forward. A few students whispered, their faces uncertain. They saw the cruelty but did nothing. Some lowered their eyes, not wanting to be caught staring. Others simply walked past, choosing the safety of silence. Inside, Emily's throat tightened. She fought back the tears that wanted to come. Crying in front of them would only give Tyler more fuel, she whispered to herself as she walked, a phrase she had repeated countless times, one her father had taught her. Strength is not about what they see. Strength is about what you carry inside. She carried herself into the building, but the weight on her shoulders felt heavier than her backpack. Emily's father, Michael Carter, had always told her that life would not be fair. A decorated Navy SEAL, he had seen the worst sides of human nature. He knew the world could be cruel, but he also knew that resilience could turn cruelty into strength. He had raised Emily alone since her mother's passing, teaching her to be independent, courageous, and unbreakable. At home, Emily was strong. She practiced moving around the house without her cane, memorizing steps, distances, and textures. She cooked simple meals, cleaned her room, and even laughed at herself when she spilled milk or dropped a plate. But at school, strength felt different. Surrounded by judgmental eyes and mocking voices, she often wondered how much longer she could endure. That afternoon, after enduring another day of whispers and cruel jokes, Emily sat quietly in her room. She traced her fingers along the raised dots of a Braille book, but her mind wasn't on the story. She thought about Tyler's words, about the laughter, about how alone she had felt. Michael knocked gently before entering. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his deep voice warm. "How was school?" Emily forced a smile, trying to mask the truth. "It was fine, Dad." But Michael had been trained to read people. He had studied the art of observing subtle details, of noticing what others missed. He saw the way Emily's shoulders slumped, the way her hands trembled slightly against the pages. Fine? He asked softly, pulling up a chair. Or just fine enough for me not to worry? Emily hesitated. She wanted to protect him, to keep her pain hidden, but the weight was too heavy. Her lips trembled as she whispered, They laughed at me again. Tyler, he pulled my hood. He said things. Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. He leaned forward and took her hand. Emily, you don't have to carry this alone. Tell me everything, and so she did. Every word, every laugh, every cruel remark poured out like water breaking through a dam. Emily's voice cracked, but she kept going until there was nothing left but silence, and the sound of her father's steady breathing. Michael squeezed her hand. His eyes, hardened by years of combat and sacrifice, softened as he looked at his daughter. You are stronger than they will ever know, he said. But strength isn't just for surviving. Sometimes strength is for teaching others what respect really means. Emily tilted her head, curious. What do you mean? Michael smiled faintly. I mean, it's time they learned a lesson. Not from me beating them up, not from me yelling at the school, but from seeing what true courage looks like. And you, Emily, are the bravest person I know. For the first time that day, Emily smiled. It was small, but it was real. Her father's words had a way of cutting through the darkness. She didn't know what he had planned, but for the first time, she didn't feel so alone. The next morning, as Emily prepared for school, she noticed her father grabbing his jacket. Are you coming with me today? She asked. Michael nodded. Just for a little while. Sometimes the best lessons aren't taught in classrooms. Emily's heart raced. She didn't know what to expect, but she trusted her father completely. As they walked to the car, the early morning sun painted the sky with streaks of gold. For Emily, it felt like a sign. A new day was beginning, and with it, perhaps a new chapter. The school courtyard was alive with the usual noise of laughter, footsteps, and chatter. Emily tapped her cane along the familiar path. The rhythm steady, the sound bouncing off the concrete and guiding her to the steps. She could feel the spring breeze brushing her cheeks, but it did little to calm her nerves. She had learned to walk with her head held high, but inside the sting of yesterday's cruelty still burned. Tyler and his friends were there again. Their red varsity jackets stood out like warning signs to Emily, even though she could not see them. She knew their voices, their footsteps, their careless laughter that always grew louder when she passed by. This time, though, something felt different. She could sense the eyes of more people on her. It wasn't just the bullies. Students scattered across the courtyard turned to watch, drawn to the unfolding tension like moths to a flame. Some knew what had happened the day before. Some simply wanted a spectacle. Emily's cane tapped against the first step of the building, but before she could climb, a voice cut through the air. Well, if it isn't our favorite blind superstar, Tyler called out, his words dripping with sarcasm. His friends chuckled, forming a loose circle around her. One whistled mockingly. Another imitated her tapping cane, clacking his shoe against the pavement. The laughter rose, harsh and echoing. Emily froze. Her grip tightened on her cane, her knuckles white beneath the sleeve of her hoodie. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, tried to steady her breathing. She told herself the same words her father had drilled into her heart. Strength is on the inside. But inside she felt herself trembling. Several students nearby shifted uncomfortably. A girl whispered, "This is wrong. Someone should say something." But her friend shook her head quickly. "Don't, you'll just make it worse. Tyler runs this place." And so they stayed silent. A teacher walked past on the opposite side of the courtyard, his eyes catching the scene. For a moment he slowed his steps, uncertainty flickering across his face. He knew Tyler's father, a wealthy man who contributed heavily to the school. Speaking up might cause trouble. The teacher's jaw tightened, and then with a sigh he turned away, pretending not to see. Emily felt the silence around her like a weight heavier than the taunts themselves. The world was watching, but no one was helping. It was as if she stood in a spotlight alone, every laugh cutting into her skin like a blade. Tyler stepped closer, his hand brushing the hood of her sweatshirt again. "What's wrong, Emily? Can't you see me?" His friends roared with laughter at the cruel joke. Emily jerked her shoulder away, forcing herself to climb the step. Her foot wavered, almost missing, but she caught herself in time. She lifted her chin, refusing to let them hear her cry. As she disappeared into the building, Tyler turned to his friends, grinning proudly, as though he had scored a touchdown. They slapped his back, their laughter chasing Emily down the hallway. Inside the classroom, Emily sat quietly at her desk. She folded her cane and placed it beside her bag. She could feel the stares of her classmates, the way the room had grown quiet when she walked in. No one said a word, but she didn't need to hear words to know what they were thinking. Her chest ached. She wanted to scream, to demand why no one spoke up. Why was it always easier for them to laugh or to look away? But instead she sat in silence, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook, grounding herself in something steady. The teacher began the lesson, his voice flat, but Emily could barely focus. The taunts replayed in her mind. The laughter rang louder than the chalk against the board. She tried to push it away, but her thoughts kept circling back. That afternoon, as she sat at the lunch table alone, she overheard a group of students nearby. "Did you see what Tyler did this morning?" one whispered. "Yeah, man, that was brutal," another replied. "Somebody should stop him," the first voice said quietly. "Are you crazy? Tyler's dad would crush anyone who tried. Even teachers don't mess with him." Emily lowered her head, her hands trembling around her sandwich. She hadn't even taken a bite. The silence of others hurt more than the cruelty of Tyler's words. At least Tyler showed his cruelty openly. Everyone else wore masks of indifference. She thought of her father. He always told her to be strong, to never let others define her worth. But how could she fight when the whole world seemed determined to stay silent? That evening, Emily sat on her bed, her cane leaning against the wall beside her. She tried to distract herself by listening to music, but even the soft melodies couldn't drown out the echoes of laughter. Michael noticed the change in her when he walked past her room. He had seen her strong many times, navigating the kitchen, memorizing steps in the park, even joking about tripping over their dog. But tonight her strength seemed dimmed like a flame flickering against the wind. He knocked lightly. "Hey, can I come in?" Emily nodded, her voice small. "Yeah." Michael stepped inside, his tall frame filling the doorway. His eyes softened as he saw her slumped shoulders. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Talk to me, kiddo." Emily hesitated, then whispered, "It's not just the bullies, Dad, it's everyone else. The teachers, the kids, even the ones who say they're my friends. Nobody says anything. They just watch." Michael's heart clenched. He had seen silence before on battlefields in towns torn apart by fear. He knew how damaging it could be when good people chose not to act. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Emily, silence can hurt worse than words. But you have to remember something. Silence doesn't mean they are right. It means they are afraid. And people who are afraid let bullies win." Emily's eyes filled with tears behind her sunglasses. "But why should I always be the one who has to be strong? Why do I have to carry it all?" Michael drew in a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because, Emily, life gave you a challenge most people could never imagine. You live in darkness, but you walk with more courage than anyone I've ever known. That makes you different. And sometimes the ones who are different carry the heaviest burdens. But they also inspire the biggest change." Emily leaned against him, her voice muffled. "I'm tired, Dad. I don't want to inspire anyone. I just want them to stop." Michael wrapped his arm around her. "And they will, because tomorrow I'm coming with you. It's time those boys and everyone else see what real strength looks like. And it's not going to come from me raising my voice or throwing a punch. It's going to come from the truth. And the truth is you're stronger than all of them combined." For the first time all day, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Her father's words didn't erase the pain, but they planted a seed of courage. Maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe tomorrow the silence would finally break. The next morning, Emily and her father walked side by side to school. She could hear the steady rhythm of his footsteps, strong and confident. It reminded her of all the times he had guided her hand, teaching her to trust her instincts. As they reached the courtyard, Michael paused, scanning the crowd. Students laughed and chatted, unaware of what was about to unfold. Tyler and his friends stood in their usual spot, their jackets bright against the morning light. Emily's hand tightened around her cane. Her father's presence gave her strength, but her heart still pounded in her chest. She knew today would not be easy, but she also knew her father never made promises he couldn't keep. The bell rang. But the real lesson of the day was only just beginning. The morning sunlight streamed through the Carter household, spilling across the kitchen table where Emily sat with her breakfast untouched. She moved her spoon slowly in the bowl, circling the cereal but not eating. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Michael Carter, her father, stood nearby, pouring coffee into a mug. He watched her carefully. Years in the Navy had taught him how to read silence, how to recognize the weight of unspoken words. And right now, Emily's silence spoke volumes. "Not hungry?" he asked gently. Emily shrugged, her shoulders hunched. "Not really." Michael took a seat across from her. His presence filled the room, not just his size, but the calm authority he carried with him. He had lived through storms most people couldn't imagine, but nothing tested his heart more than seeing his daughter hurting. "Emily," he said softly, "you've barely touched your food. Talk to me. What's going on in that mind of yours?" Emily hesitated. She wanted to be strong, to show him she could handle it. But the words she had bottled up since yesterday pressed against her chest, demanding to be spoken. Her hands trembled as she set the spoon down. "They won't stop, Dad," she whispered. "Tyler and his friends. Every day it's something new. Yesterday he pulled my hood again. He said I wouldn't leave alive." Everyone laughed. And no one did anything. Not the teachers, not the kids, and nobody. They just watched. Her voice cracked. Tears welled behind her dark sunglasses. She hated crying in front of him, but she couldn't hold it in anymore. Michael's jaw tightened. He reached across the table and took her hand in his, steady and firm. "Emily," he said, his voice low but unwavering, "you don't have to carry this by yourself. You're not alone." Emily's throat tightened. "But I feel alone. Every time I walk down those halls, it's like the whole world is against me. And I'm so tired of being strong. Why do I always have to be the one who fights?" Michael leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers even though she couldn't see them. "Because life gave you a challenge most people will never understand. You walk in darkness every day, but you walk with more courage than they'll ever know. That makes you stronger than all of them." Emily shook her head, her voice breaking. "But I don't feel strong." Michael exhaled slowly, choosing his words with care. "Strength isn't about what you feel in the moment. It's about what you do despite the fear. You've already shown more strength than those boys ever will. But it's time they learned what real strength looks like." Emily tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" Michael's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. "I mean, I'm not going to let this go on. Not because I want to fight your battles for you, but because I want to show them who you really are. They think blindness makes you weak. They couldn't be more wrong. And it's time they find out." Emily's heart pounded. She knew that tone in her father's voice, the tone that carried weight, the tone of a man who had faced impossible missions and never backed down. "But how?" she asked softly. Michael squeezed her hand. "Trust me, Emily. I've handled tougher situations than a few high school bullies. They want to play games? Fine. I'll give them a lesson they won't forget. Not through anger, not through violence, but through truth. And you'll be right there with me." For the first time in days, Emily felt a flicker of hope. She didn't know what her father had planned, but she trusted him completely. He had never let her down. Later that evening, Michael stood in his study, staring at the framed photographs on the wall. His Navy SEAL unit, men standing shoulder to shoulder, faces hardened by experience. Medals of honor, folded flags, reminders of a life he had left behind but could never forget. He thought about the missions he had led, the fear he had faced, the darkness he had endured. And then he thought about Emily, his greatest mission, his greatest responsibility. Protecting her wasn't about shielding her from pain. It was about preparing her to rise above it. He clenched his fist, his vow solidifying in his heart. These boys will learn. Not through fear, not through punishment, but through understanding what real courage looks like. They will see my daughter the way I see her. The next morning, Emily woke to the smell of breakfast. Her father had made pancakes, her favorite. She smiled faintly as she tapped her way to the kitchen. "You're in a good mood," she said. Michael handed her a plate, his tone light but steady. "Big day ahead." Emily tilted her head, listening to the firmness in his voice. "You're coming with me, aren't you?" "Just for a little while," he said. "Sometimes the best lessons aren't taught in classrooms." Emily's stomach twisted with nerves. She wasn't sure what he had planned, but she trusted him. She always did. As they ate, Michael outlined a plan, not every detail, but enough to reassure her. "I'm not going to embarrass you, Emily. This isn't about me taking over. This is about showing those boys and everyone else that mocking someone who can't see is the weakest thing they could ever do." Emily swallowed hard. And what if they don't listen? Michael's smile was calm, confident. Oh, they'll listen. They just don't know it yet. When they arrived at school, Emily felt her heart race. The courtyard buzzed with the usual morning chaos. She heard the familiar voices of Tyler and his friends, their laughter sharp and cruel. Michael walked beside her, his presence steady like an anchor. Heads turned as they passed, students whispering. Some recognized him from previous school events. Others just noticed the quiet authority he carried. Tyler spotted Emily and smirked. Well, look who it is. And she brought Daddy to protect her. His friends laughed, their voices loud. Michael stopped, his eyes fixed on Tyler. His voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced the laughter. Careful, son. You don't know who you're talking to. Tyler faltered, thrown off by the man's composure, but he quickly recovered, puffing his chest. I'm talking to the girl who can't even see where she's going. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily flinched, but Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Funny thing about sight, Michael said, his voice cutting through the courtyard. It doesn't make you strong. It just makes you see. Strength comes from what you do when you're in the dark. And my daughter knows more about that than you ever will, the crowd murmured. Students leaned in, sensing something important unfolding. Michael's eyes narrowed, his vow echoing in every word. Today you're going to learn a lesson you'll never forget. The courtyard grew still. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what was coming. Emily stood tall, her cane tapping lightly against the ground, her father's words wrapping around her like armor. For the first time, the balance of power in the courtyard began to shift. The courtyard of Roosevelt High was alive with chatter that morning. Backpacks swung across shoulders, sneakers squeaked against concrete, and voices mixed in a restless chorus before the bell. But the noise dulled the moment Emily and her father stepped into the open space together. Emily felt the tension immediately. She could not see the dozens of eyes that turned toward her, but she could sense it, the way conversations hushed, the way footsteps slowed. Whispers rippled through the air. Why is her dad here? Who is he? Michael Carter walked beside his daughter with a calm presence that was impossible to ignore. He wasn't dressed in a uniform, but there was something about him, an authority in his stride, a quiet power in his posture that made people stop and watch. His gaze scanned the crowd the way it once had scanned battlefields, sharp, alert, unwavering. Emily's heart pounded. She tapped her cane lightly against the concrete, counting her steps, focusing on the rhythm to keep steady. Having her father by her side gave her strength, but she also felt exposed. She knew Tyler and his friends wouldn't let this moment pass without a scene. Sure enough, Tyler's voice cut through the courtyard like a knife. Well, look at this, he sneered. She brought back up. What's wrong, Emily? Couldn't fight your own battles? Laughter erupted from his circle of friends. Some students nearby chuckled nervously, but most stayed quiet, curious to see what would unfold. Michael stopped, his hand resting gently on Emily's shoulder. He turned toward the boys, his voice calm yet firm. That's enough. The single phrase carried more weight than a shout. The courtyard fell silent. Even Tyler's friends stopped laughing, their eyes flickering between their leader and the tall man standing before them. Tyler smirked, trying to recover. And who are you supposed to be? Michael didn't answer right away. He took a slow step forward, his eyes fixed on Tyler. I'm the man who raised this young woman. I'm the man who has watched her fight battles every single day that you couldn't even imagine. And I'm the man who won't stand by while you mistake cruelty for strength. The words hung heavy in the air. Students shifted uncomfortably. A teacher passing by slowed to watch, drawn by the sudden stillness. Tyler tried to scoff, but his voice cracked slightly. We're just messing around. It's a joke, Michael's eyes narrowed. A joke? He glanced around at the silent courtyard. Does anyone here look like they're laughing? Do you? The question pierced the crowd. No one answered. Tyler's smirk faltered. His friends shuffled, avoiding Michael's gaze. Michael's voice grew stronger, though still controlled. Let me tell you something about jokes. Real jokes don't crush someone. Real jokes don't leave scars. What you're doing isn't a joke, it's cowardice. Gasps rose from the students. Some nodded, whispering agreement. Tyler's face flushed. He opened his mouth, but Michael lifted a hand, silencing him. You think you're strong because you can see and she can't? Michael asked. His voice was steady, sharp, commanding attention. Then let's test that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 folded pieces of cloth, blindfolds. He held them up for everyone to see. "Put these on." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Tyler blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "You heard me," Michael said. "You and your friends. Blindfold yourselves. Show us how strong you are when the world goes dark." The courtyard buzzed with anticipation. Students leaned closer, pulling out phones, sensing something unforgettable was about to happen. Even teachers lingered at the edges, unsure whether to intervene or let this strange lesson unfold. Tyler scoffed, but the unease in his eyes betrayed him. "That's stupid. Stupid?" Michael repeated, his tone cool. "What's stupid is mocking a girl who lives every day in darkness and still finds the courage to stand here among you. What's stupid is thinking strength comes from sight instead of character. So go ahead. Prove me wrong. Show everyone here that you're stronger than her." The courtyard grew tense. Tyler glanced at his friends. One of them muttered, "Maybe we should just do it." Another nodded nervously. Reluctantly, Tyler snatched one of the blindfolds from Michael's hand. His friends followed, slipping them over their eyes. The crowd hushed, waiting. Michael crossed his arms. "Now walk across the courtyard. Just to the steps. That's all." The boys hesitated, their hands stretching out awkwardly. Tyler took a step and immediately stumbled, nearly crashing into Chris, who was groping blindly in front of him. Laughter exploded, not at Emily this time, but at the bullies. "Careful, Tyler," someone shouted. "Don't trip on a shadow." The mocking words they had once thrown at Emily now boomeranged back at them. The boys flailed, bumping into each other, stumbling over benches, their movements clumsy and panicked. The laughter of the crowd grew louder, but this time it wasn't cruel. It was justice. Emily stood quietly at her father's side, her lips curling into the faintest smile. For once, the laughter didn't cut her. It healed. After a few agonizing minutes, Michael stepped forward. "That's enough. Take them off." The boys ripped the blindfolds off, their faces flushed with embarrassment. They avoided the eyes of the crowd, their swagger completely stripped away. Michael's voice cut through the silence once more. "You see how quickly strength disappears when you lose your sight? That's the reality my daughter lives in every single day, and yet she doesn't stumble. She doesn't complain. She walks through life with courage you can't even begin to understand. That's strength. That's character." The crowd erupted in applause. Some students even cheered. For the first time, Emily wasn't the subject of whispers or pity. She was the symbol of respect. Tyler stood frozen, his jaw tight, his pride wounded. But even he couldn't deny what had just happened. His friends lowered their heads, shame heavy on their faces. Michael turned to the crowd. "Remember this moment. Real strength isn't found in mocking weakness. Real strength is found in lifting others up. If you want to be remembered for something, let it be respect, not cruelty." With that, he placed a hand on Emily's shoulder and guided her toward the steps. The crowd parted silently, watching in awe as father and daughter walked away together. For Emily, every step felt lighter than the last. For once, she wasn't walking through silence and laughter alone. She was walking with dignity, with pride, and with the knowledge that things had begun to change. The applause still echoed in the courtyard when Michael Carter raised his hand gently, signaling for quiet. The noise died down almost instantly, as if every student sensed that what was coming next would matter more than anything they had ever heard in school. Tyler and his friends stood red-faced, their blindfolds hanging loosely in their hands. They shuffled awkwardly, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The swagger that had once carried them like kings of the campus was gone. In its place was a raw discomfort, the realization that they had been exposed not just as bullies but as cowards. Michael looked around at the students, then back at the boys. His voice carried through the courtyard, not loud but steady, sharp, commanding. "Do you know why you stumbled just now?" he asked. Tyler muttered, "Because we couldn't see." Michael nodded. "Exactly. You couldn't see. For a few minutes, you lived in the world my daughter lives in every single day. But unlike you, she doesn't stumble. She doesn't panic. She doesn't give up. She moves forward. That is strength." The crowd listened in silence, every word sinking deep. Michael's gaze shifted from the boys to the rest of the students. "Most of you stand by and watch. You don't laugh, but you don't stop it either. And silence." He paused, his voice tightening. "Silence gives cruelty permission to grow." Emily felt her throat tighten. She had thought the silence of others was invisible, unnoticed. But her father saw it, and now he was naming it for everyone to hear. Michael took a slow step forward. I want you all to understand something. Strength isn't about how loud you are. It isn't about how many people laugh at your jokes. Strength is about character, about how you treat those who can't fight back. The courtyard was so still that even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Michael drew in a deep breath. You all see me standing here. You don't know much about me, but let me tell you something. He paused, his eyes sharp, his words deliberate. I was a Navy SEAL. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Students exchanged wide-eyed looks. Even some teachers at the edge straightened, their jaws tight with surprise. Michael continued, his tone calm but heavy with truth. I've walked into places most people would never dare. I've faced men who wanted nothing more than to see me broken or dead. And in those moments when everything was dark, I learned something important. Sight doesn't keep you alive. Courage does. Discipline does. Respect does. He turned his gaze back to Tyler, who was still shifting uneasily. And the truth is, my daughter has more courage than you. Because every morning she steps into a world full of shadows, a world that many of you mocked, and she doesn't quit. She doesn't run. She faces it head on. That takes more bravery than any of your jokes will ever hold. Emily's lips trembled. For the first time, she felt seen, not in the way of pity or curiosity, but in the way that mattered. Her father's words wrapped around her like armor, reminding her that her daily struggles weren't weakness. They were proof of her strength. Michael wasn't finished. He turned to the crowd again. Do you want to know what I saw out there on battlefields halfway across the world? I saw men who mocked weakness fall the hardest. I saw those who looked down on others crumble when real danger came. And I saw quiet men, humble men, the ones everyone underestimated, become heroes because they respected those around them. Respect, not arrogance, is what makes you strong. Students shifted, their eyes wide, their expressions thoughtful. The lesson was sinking in deeper than any textbook ever could. Michael's voice lowered, but it carried even more power. So here's the truth. You can keep mocking people like Emily. You can keep laughing at those who are different. But every time you do, you're telling the world you're weaker than them, because it takes no courage to laugh at someone who can't fight back. Real courage is standing beside them. Real courage is speaking up when no one else will. He let the words hang in the air. They struck deep, not just Tyler and his friends, but every student who had ever stayed silent, every teacher who had turned away. Emily shifted slightly, her cane tapping lightly against the ground. She felt the weight of her father's words, but she also felt something new. Eyes on her, not with pity, but with respect. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. My daughter doesn't need me to fight her battles. She's been fighting them every day. But I came today to remind all of you what you should already know. Mocking her doesn't make you stronger. It only shows your fear. The silence broke with a sound no one expected. Applause. It started with a single clap from the back of the crowd, then another. And soon the courtyard was filled with the sound of hands coming together, not out of politeness, but out of genuine respect. Emily's chest swelled with emotion. She had dreamed of this moment, but never believed it would come. For once, she wasn't just the blind girl who got laughed at. She was the girl who had shown the whole school what strength really meant. Tyler and his friends stood frozen, their faces burned with shame. They wanted to disappear, to escape the judgment of their peers, but there was no escape. The lesson had been taught and everyone had seen the truth. Michael let the applause continue for a moment before raising his hand again. The courtyard quieted instantly. Remember this, he said. Every single one of you has the choice to be strong or weak every day. And that choice isn't about how much you can lift, how fast you can run, or how loud you can yell. It's about how you treat others. Respect is strength. Arrogance is weakness. And one day when you're tested, you'll find out which one you chose. He turned to Emily. Ready to head inside? Emily nodded, her voice steady. Yes, Dad. Together they walked toward the steps. The students parted to let them through, some bowing their heads, others clapping softly again. As they disappeared into the building, whispers spread, not of mockery, but of admiration. Emily's name was on their lips, not as a joke, but as a symbol. For the first time in her life at Roosevelt High, Emily walked through the halls not as someone pitied or mocked, but as someone respected. The sound of applause still lingered in the hallways even after Michael and Emily had stepped inside. Students walked in clusters, whispering about what they had just witnessed. For once, the whispers weren't cruel. They weren't mocking. They carried awe, surprise, even respect. Emily felt the shift immediately. She tapped her cane lightly against the polished floor, her father's steady footsteps guiding her toward her first class. Normally, she could feel stairs cutting into her like invisible knives. But today, the stairs carried a different weight. She could almost sense it, the soft hush of admiration, the silence of realization. Behind her, Tyler and his friends trailed slowly, their heads bowed. Their jackets, once symbols of power, now felt heavy on their shoulders. Students who used to cheer their cruelty now avoided their eyes. For the first time, the bullies were the ones shrinking under the gaze of others. Emily sat down at her desk. She folded her cane neatly beside her bag, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of her notebook. She felt lighter, but the day wasn't over. Change never came in an instant. It had to take root. Michael remained at the back of the classroom, his arms crossed, his presence unshakable. The teacher, a man who had turned away too many times, glanced at him nervously before beginning the lesson. But even as he spoke, the room was different. Every student listened, not just to the lesson in the book, but to the silent reminder of what they had seen outside. During lunch, Emily usually sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria. Today, something unexpected happened. As she carried her tray carefully to her usual spot, a voice called out, "Emily, do you want to sit here with us?" She paused, tilting her head toward the voice. It was Sarah, one of the quieter girls from her history class. Emily hesitated. She wasn't used to invitations, but something in Sarah's tone was genuine. Slowly, Emily nodded and made her way to the table. The girls shifted to make room, guiding her gently. For the first time, Emily ate her lunch surrounded by company. The conversations weren't forced. They weren't full of pity. They were just normal. About classes, about the upcoming school dance, about homework. Emily laughed softly, realizing how much she had missed the simple joy of belonging. From across the room, Tyler watched. His friends whispered uneasily, their once cocky voices subdued. One of them muttered, "Man, we look like fools." Tyler clenched his jaw, his pride battling with shame. For the first time, he wasn't sure what to do. Later that afternoon, as the final bell rang, Tyler found himself standing outside the school doors. His friends had already left, muttering excuses. He lingered, staring at the ground. Then slowly he walked toward Emily. She stood with her father, her cane tapping lightly as they prepared to head home. Michael noticed Tyler immediately. His stance stiffened, protective, but he didn't step forward. He wanted to see what the boy would do. "Emily," Tyler began, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Emily tilted her head, listening. She didn't speak right away. Silence stretched between them. Tyler swallowed hard. "I was wrong. About everything. You're stronger than me. Stronger than any of us. I shouldn't have said those things. I shouldn't have laughed, He trailed off, struggling to find words. Emily's heart pounded. She had imagined apologies before, but never thought they would come. Slowly she spoke, her voice steady but soft. "Do you know what hurt the most, Tyler? It wasn't just your words. It was that everyone else stayed quiet. That's what made me feel invisible." Tyler lowered his head. "I know, and I can't change the past, but I don't want to be that guy anymore." Michael stepped closer then, his voice firm but calm. "Words are easy, son. Change comes with action. If you want to prove you're sorry, then show it. Stand up the next time you see someone treated the way you treated her." Tyler nodded slowly. For once, he didn't argue. He didn't smirk. He simply accepted the truth. As he walked away, Emily exhaled deeply. She wasn't sure if Tyler would truly change, but the apology mattered. It was a crack in the wall, a small step toward something better. Over the next few days, the school began to shift. Students who had once whispered cruel jokes now whispered in admiration. Teachers who had looked away started paying attention. And Tyler, though quieter, began to walk differently. He didn't mock. He didn't laugh at others. Sometimes he even silenced his friends when they tried. For Emily, the change was almost overwhelming. She had lived so long under shadows that the light felt strange. She was invited to study groups, asked to sit with others at lunch, even greeted in the hallways with smiles instead of stares. But what mattered most wasn't the attention. It was the respect. the sense that her courage had finally been seen for what it was. One evening, as she sat with her father on the porch, listening to the crickets, she spoke softly. "Dad, I never thought things would change. I thought this was just the way it would always be." Michael leaned back in his chair, his voice warm. "Change doesn't come easy, Emily. But sometimes it just takes one moment, one lesson to open people's eyes." "You gave them that lesson?" Emily smiled faintly. "You helped." Michael shook his head gently. "I just gave them a push. You're the reason they're changing. You're the one who showed them what real strength looks like." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt peace. The pain of the past didn't vanish, but it no longer defined her. She knew she had turned her scars into something greater, into a lesson that touched not just her bullies but her entire school. The following week, the principal called an assembly. Students filled the gymnasium, buzzing with anticipation. Michael was invited to speak, but he insisted that Emily join him on stage. When she stepped up, guided by her cane, the gym fell silent. Her father stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Michael addressed the students briefly, reminding them of the lesson in the courtyard. Then he turned to Emily. "Do you want to say something?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated. Her heart raced. She wasn't used to speaking to crowds. But she thought of all the times she had been silent, all the times she had let the laughter cut into her without reply. This time she wanted her voice to be heard. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier. "I know I can't see, but I can feel. I can hear. And I know what it's like to be mocked, to be made to feel small. It hurts, it makes you want to disappear. But I also know this, I'm still here. I didn't disappear. And every day I keep walking. That's what strength is." The gym erupted in applause. Tears welled in the eyes of some students. Even a few teachers wiped their faces quietly. Michael's chest swelled with pride. He had led men through battles, but no victory compared to this. His daughter standing tall, her voice breaking the silence that had once surrounded her. That night, as they returned home, Emily turned to her father. "Do you think they'll remember?" Michael smiled softly. "Yes, they'll remember. Because you didn't just show them strength. You showed them truth. And truth stays." Emily leaned against him, a small smile playing on her lips. For the first time, the future didn't feel so heavy. It felt open, filled with possibility. The weeks that followed the courtyard lesson moved differently at Roosevelt High. The air seemed lighter, the hallways less sharp with laughter that cut, and more filled with greetings that felt genuine. For Emily, each step down the crowded corridors was no longer a march through shadows, but a walk through a world slowly learning to see her for who she was, not for what she lacked. The bullies who once controlled the school's rhythm no longer strutted with the same arrogance. Tyler, the loudest among them, walked quieter now. He no longer cracked jokes at others' expense. He no longer yanked Emily's hood or mocked her cane. Instead, he lingered at the edges, uncertain, as though he was relearning how to exist in a place where cruelty was no longer celebrated. One afternoon, as Emily made her way toward the cafeteria, she heard footsteps approaching quickly behind her. She tensed for a moment, old habits rushing back. But then she heard Tyler's voice, not loud, not mocking, but steady. "Emily," he said softly. She paused, her cane tapping lightly against the floor. "Yes?" There was silence for a moment, then Tyler spoke again, his tone different from anything she had heard before. I know I already said sorry, but I need you to know. I mean it, I was wrong. I thought making people laugh at you made me stronger. But it didn't, it just made me weak. I see that now." Emily stood still, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't answer right away. Forgiveness was not simple. Words could not erase the pain of years. But she had also learned something from her father. Forgiveness was not for the one who hurt you. It was for yourself. She turned her head slightly toward him. "I don't forgive because you deserve it, Tyler. I forgive because I deserve peace. But if you really mean what you say, prove it, be better. Not just to me, but to everyone else you used to treat the way you treated me." Tyler nodded, his voice firm. "I will. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't meant to be. But it was a beginning." As days turned to weeks, change spread quietly through the school. Sarah and the group of girls who had first invited Emily to their table became close friends, walking with her to classes, helping when she needed it, but never treating her like she was less. Other students, inspired by Michael's words, began stepping in when they saw bullying, no longer willing to be silent witnesses. Even the teachers changed. The ones who had once turned away now paid closer attention, stepping in when whispers turned cruel, reminding students of the lesson they had all witnessed. For Emily, the difference was profound. She still faced challenges. She still lived in a world without sight, but she no longer felt invisible. She no longer walked alone. One crisp morning, the school organized a special assembly to honor veterans. Michael was invited to speak, and this time Emily walked on stage beside him with confidence. The gymnasium was filled with students, teachers, and parents, all waiting. Michael spoke first, sharing stories of courage, discipline, and the sacrifices of those who had served. His words carried the same steady weight they had in the courtyard. But then he turned to Emily. "My daughter has taught me more about courage than the battlefield ever did," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She faces darkness every day and still she walks forward. That is bravery. And she has shown all of you that mocking someone does not make you strong. Respect does." He stepped back and the microphone was placed in Emily's hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I never asked to be different. I never wanted to stand out this way. But I've learned that being different doesn't make you less. It makes you stronger in ways people can't always see. I'm not brave because I chose to be blind. I'm brave because I chose not to give up." The gym fell silent. Her words reached places books and lessons could not. "I used to think silence hurt the most," Emily continued, "when people laughed and others just watched. But I don't think that anymore. I think silence can change too. Silence can turn into voices that defend, into hands that help, into hearts that finally see. And that's what I've felt these past weeks. That change. That respect. And I am grateful." When she finished, the gym erupted into thunderous applause. Teachers stood. Students clapped until their hands ached. Even Tyler, sitting near the front, clapped the loudest, his eyes lowered but his expression sincere. Later that night, as Emily and Michael sat together on their porch, she leaned against his shoulder. The stars glimmered faintly above, though she couldn't see them. But she felt the cool night air, the warmth of her father beside her, and the peace she had longed for finally settling into her heart. "Dad," she whispered, "I think they finally see me. Not as the blind girl, just as me." Michael wrapped his arm around her, his voice low. "They always should have. Sometimes it just takes a little light to open people's eyes. You were that light, Emily." She smiled faintly. "You helped?" Michael chuckled softly. "Maybe. But you're the one who walked through the fire. I just stood by you while you did." For a long while they sat in silence. Not the painful silence of the past, but the comfortable silence of peace. The next day at school, something happened that would have seemed impossible weeks before. As Emily walked into the courtyard, cane tapping lightly against the ground, Tyler was waiting. But he didn't mock. He didn't sneer. Instead, he extended his hand toward her. "Need a guide to class?" he asked, his voice humble. Emily paused. She could feel the stares of the students around them. She could sense the shock in the air. Slowly, she reached out and let her hand rest lightly on his arm. "Just don't trip on a shadow," she said with the faintest smile. The crowd laughed, but this time it wasn't cruel. It was warm, genuine, filled with relief. In that moment, the balance had shifted completely. The bullies who once mocked her now walked beside her. The students who once stayed silent now spoke up. And Emily, once isolated, now stood as a symbol of courage and respect. Her father's vow had come true. The bullies had learned their lesson. The school had changed, and Emily had not only found respect, she had earned it. As Michael watched from a distance, pride swelled in his chest. He had led men through impossible battles. But this, watching his daughter transform pain into power, was the greatest victory of his life. And for Emily, walking down the hall with her cane in one hand and the support of her peers on the other, the world no longer felt like a place of darkness. It felt like a place where even shadows could turn into light.